The January 6th committee wants you to understand two very important things. Number one, it is very, 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 very bad to ever call into question the result of a presidential election after the news media have declared a winner. Number two, these people are even more incapable of shame than we thought they were previously, which is really saying something. You might not expect to hear number one coming out of the mouths of this particular bunch, since every single Democrat on this fake committee has voted, some of them more than once, to not certify the result of a presidential election that their party's candidate lost. In fact, the chairman himself, Benny Thompson, he's been in Congress for upwards of 20 years, and he has never voted to certify a Republican presidential election win. He voted against certifying George W. Bush in 2004 in an election that wasn't particularly close. Then he voted against certifying Donald Trump in 2016 in another election that was not particularly close. Zoe Lofgren, she's been around even longer. So long, in fact, that she refused to vote for certifying the result of Bush v. Gore in 2000. And speaking of that election, it creates another delicious little morsel of hypocrisy, what with all these Democrats running around saying one mustn't question election results, because I'm old enough to remember, and you probably are too, election night in 2000, when NBC News called Florida for Bush, making him the winner of the election. Then all of the other networks followed and called it themselves. Then Gore picked up the phone, called up W, and conceded the election, only to change his mind a couple hours later and unconcede. So to put it another way, the Democrats are just overflowing with intellectual consistency and moral credibility when they proclaim you an enemy of democracy, an insurrectionist seditionist of the most domestic terror-y kind. If you are not prepared to swallow hook, line, and sinker the proposition that says the semi-animated cadaver of Joe Biden on his fourth try for the presidency, having been laughed out of the room the other 3 times, all of a sudden he became the most popular, most widely beloved presidential candidate in the history of the country, after running a campaign in which he did little else most days but to shuffle out to his front yard and mutter unintelligible gibberish for 7 or 8 minutes. They tell us he got 81 million votes. It's an easy number to remember because they remind us of it constantly, almost as if they are the ones trying to convince themselves. Almost as if they realize full well how absurd it sounds to suggest that Joe Biden, the dullest, most unexceptional man in U.S. politics in the last half-century, a man in the throes of such severe cognitive decline it was often difficult to watch, received 81 million lawful non-duplicate votes from legally registered U.S. citizens who actually had a pulse on Election Day. But again, it is very, very, very bad to voice any objection to an election result that has been duly declared by the Fourth Estate. Well, except for 2000 and 2004 and 2016. With those 3 exceptions, it is very, very bad to ever question the result of a presidential election. It's basically the worst thing you can do as an American, aside from, say, cracking open a Coors Light in the Capitol Rotunda, or farting on Nancy Pelosi's desk, or almost raping AOC from across the street and down the block. They tell us it's a bad thing to do because it can undermine faith in our institutions. But you know what totally doesn't undermine faith in our institutions? Intimidating Supreme Court justices outside their homes in the hopes of terrorizing them into voting the way you think they ought to on a certain decision. Because that is totally within the bounds of acceptable conduct, threatening a man's wife and children, keeping his whole neighborhood awake all night in the hopes that he'll be so frightened that he starts voting for abortion on demand up until the 17th month of pregnancy, or whatever the latest demand is. That is just what democracy looks like, as they constantly chant to us in their inimitably shrill, screechy, purple-haired land whale voices of theirs. And wouldn't you love to listen to that all night? The unrequited mating call of the North American purple-haired land whale in its own natural environment. You know, Jim Eagle, if you need to take some time off and travel to suburban Maryland, I'm sure you could find yourself a real nice girl in that crowd. The future mother of your little Jim Eaglets. You can even do it the old-fashioned way, like club her on the head and drag her back home by the nose ring. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we're currently violating California law by not having a tampon machine in the men's room, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And I don't know about you, but when I decide how I'm going to spend my entertainment dollar, There's only one question I want to know the answer to. If I buy a ticket to this thing, will I get to see a middle-aged woman twerking with a 2-foot-long strap-on dildo? Because that is pure class, Christina Aguilera, and I'm sure the assembled crowd will never forget it. One day they will be telling their grandkids, you know, I was there on that famous night of all nights when a 41-year-old Christina Aguilera strapped on a 20-inch prosthetic phallus and pretended to copulate with every person and thing in sight, and you know what made it all so beautiful? It was for pride. Speaking of which, you may have noticed, as I have, that it used to be called Gay Pride Month, then it became Pride Month, and now it seems the moniker's been shortened yet again to just Pride. It's always fun how the leftists just hijack words and phrases for their own uses. So now if you use the word pride in just about any context, it is assumed that you're self-identifying as a practitioner of some fashionable mode of sexual non-normativity. So now, when you open up your favorite streaming platform, you get bombarded with rainbow crap and big banners that say, "Celebrate Pride!" And just, why? Who is that for? Celebrate Pride just sounds weird. It almost sounds vaguely menacing, like you're being given an order and you better follow it if you know what's good for you. So you're going to watch a movie by a gay director, and you're going to like it, and you're going to celebrate his gayness the entire time, because that is what Pride Month is all about. Coercing and shaming normal people into feeling like there is a societal expectation that they have to express unconditional approval of other people's non-normative sexual tastes. Oh, what, you thought you could just be tolerant and accepting? You thought you could say, I'll mind my own business, you mind yours? You thought you could say, it's a free country. I ain't gonna tell grown adults what they can do in their own bedrooms? Yeah, right, you filthy homophobe. You'll get this stuff rubbed in your nose every day for the remainder of your natural-born life, and you will love it, and you will damn well say you love it. Now, is that in any way unclear? Oh, and speaking of unmistakable signs that a society is careening off the cliff of moral suicide, Nancy Pelosi went to a drag queen show yesterday where she was briefly mistaken for one of the drag queens until she raised her skirt and put the matter to rest. Now, are drag queens some sort of big political constituency and I just never had any idea? Seriously, the Speaker of the House of Goddamn Representatives made an appearance at a drag queen show. An official appearance in her official capacity. Because, what, we have to make sure the drag queens don't go off the reservation and become Trump voters? Is that how that works? But hell, I guess it's a refreshing change of pace that there weren't any little kids in the room. For it seems like Democrat elected officials, they just cannot get enough of big, hulking, mentally disturbed men in dresses. Again, the Speaker of the House is the number 3 in the presidential line of succession, and she went to a drag queen show, where she sat through the entire drag queen performance, then gave a speech about how drag queens are what makes America great. That is a real thing she said. And she says that all the time to her many drag queen friends, she says that. Not only did the number 3 official in our national government attend a drag queen show, not only did she give a glowing address extolling the virtues of being a cross-dressing pervert, but she took the additional step of claiming she has many drag queen friends with whom she hangs out frequently. Now, I ain't no fancy political consultant. I'm just a simple man making his way in the galaxy. But is this supposed to help your party in November? Because you can go ahead and mark down this prediction right now. This footage of Pelosi yucking it up with the drag queens is going to appear in one hell of a lot more Republican campaign ads than it ever does in Democrat campaign ads. In fact, I don't think it will be in any Democrat campaign ads because Nancy Pelosi is the only person in Washington with a lower approval rating than either the president, such as he is, or the vice president, such as she is. And something tells me it's going to be in a whole hell of a lot of Republican campaign ads, and the same thing with the January 6th committee. That thing has not generated one word nor one scrap of footage that will help any vulnerable Democrat win in November. But it has provided a veritable motherlode of ammunition for the Republicans, and the ads, they practically write themselves. Benny Thompson says you're not allowed to question the election of 2020, but he voted against certifying the elections of 2004 and 2016. And that's only one of the angles you can play here. If you prefer, you can go with something like, Democrats have been in charge of the government for 2 years. They have wrecked the economy, opened the border, crashed the currency, betrayed our allies, emboldened our enemies, and you're currently skipping meals so you can afford to put gas in your car. And the Democrats? They just want to talk about how much they hate Donald Trump. So here's an idea. How about they hire a drag queen to work in the HHS department and they dress him up in a naval uniform? Crap, they already did that, didn't they? Drag queens and bad orange men, that is where the men who run your government want your focus to be. If you try to bring up their many failures or the harm they have consciously inflicted on the people of the country in order so they could toss slabs of red meat to their favorite special interest groups, like the crippling of the domestic energy sector and the expenditure of $1 million per day to not finish the border wall, they will look you square in the eye and tell you that was all Vladimir Putin's fault. So here's a question for you. Serious question. Who is the most competent person in Joe Biden's cabinet? Javier Becerra? Mayor Pete? Mayorkas the alien lizard man? Freaking Janet Yellen? Jennifer Granholm? It's a real murderer's row of intellectual heavyweights, ain't it? Actually, here's a better question. Does anybody in Joe Biden's cabinet have any skills that are in any way relevant to the duties of the position they currently occupy? Because I can't think of one. Every person in this cabinet is either a diversity hire or one of the Democrat candidates from the 2020 field. And they were just plugged into wherever. You just take that job, who cares? You know what? I've got an even better question than those first two. What in the actual hell would it take for somebody's ass to get fired in this administration? They sort of almost made Janet Yellen fall on her sword the other day when they forced her to admit she was wildly mistaken back when she was telling anybody with a TV camera that the inflation was transitory and it'll be finished in a jiffy. Whoops, sorry, I didn't realize it would be this bad. Oh well. And that's the end of it. And she goes right on keeping her job, despite never having been good at much of anything. She was chairman of the Fed under Obama. She was horrible at that job. Then she rode the government academia revolving door to a cushy university presidency while Trump was in office. And then as soon as the Democrats get back in, she gets duly installed as the Treasury Secretary, and she gets right back to work being terrible and clueless and acting generally like a woman who should be gumming a cup of tapioca pudding in a damn nursing home somewhere. And we've heard a lot of that from Joe Biden himself, in addition to the retards in his cabinet. He's always saying, well, nobody knew such and such thing was going to happen. We didn't know there was going to be 2 more COVID variants. We didn't know Putin was going to invade Ukraine. So, in other words, Joe seems to be making the argument that he's perfectly capable of being a good president as long as he always knows exactly what events are going to transpire ahead of time. If you throw something unexpected into the mix, then, yeah, obviously I'm going to screw the pooch, but that's not my fault. What, you want me to adapt to events in real time? Make snap decisions like a confident, decisive leader? Do I need to remind you I was a 6-term senator? Senators never have to decide things quickly, and they damn sure never have to face the consequences of the dumbass things they say and do. So if you want the country to run better, just make sure nothing ever happens that's a surprise. Is that so much to ask? So apparently Joe and Jill Biden were both speaking separately at some high-dollar DNC donor events in Los Angeles over the weekend, and they try really hard to make sure no video or audio of these things gets out, because, let's face it, these have got to be some painfully bleak affairs. I mean, just in the act of driving through LA to get to wherever the venue was, as you pass homeless tent city after homeless tent city, as you're confronted with the real-world ramifications of the policies your party favors. I wonder if that causes any pangs of regret or self-awareness, but I tend to doubt it. Now, at the fundraiser where Dr. Jill was flying solo, the plates ranged in cost from $6,500 to $35,000. So some human being, most likely more than one, actually paid $35 large for a plate of hotel food and a picture with Jill Biden. And during her remarks, she used one of her stock lines, a line she uses nearly as often as Dopey Joe goes to the Deer and Kevlar vests card, when she claims that since Joe's been in office, people are always coming up to her saying, "I can breathe again," because the Trump years were so unbearable with all that peace and prosperity and security. People across the country, they actually lost the ability of respiration. And all I have to say about that, I can say by borrowing a famous quote from the immortal George Floyd, patron saint of counterfeiters and guys who pistol whip pregnant women. I can't breathe. Meanwhile, back to the drag queens, because it always comes back to the drag queens. It was disclosed yesterday that something like $500,000 of taxpayer money was spent by the government of New York City to put on drag queen story hours in public libraries for little kids. The American left, or the media Democrat complex, if you prefer, has this single-minded desire, which I don't fully understand or even partially understand, to see to it that small children, as many small children as possible, are regularly exposed to male sex perverts who dress up like women. The maintenance of anything resembling childhood innocence has been tossed out the window. Kids need weird, creepy sex, they keep telling us. They need lots of weird, creepy sex. They need to be around drag queens at the library. They need to have gender-queer teachers at school with jello-colored hair who talk incessantly about all the weird, creepy sex that they like to have. At this point, if you're a parent who raises your hand and says, no, actually, I don't want my child exposed to anyone's sexuality, frankly, and when the time comes for learning about such things, I will be the one doing the teaching and not Madam Jizzsock and his band of bearded chorus girls. Of course, the perverts who participate in these drag queen story hour things, they say it's all about helping little kids learn to read. They're just trying to be good-hearted community volunteers, don't you see? So maybe you should set your old-fashioned prejudices aside, Mom and Dad, and stop being so bigoted and transphobic. Except here's the thing. If it was really about helping little kids learn to read, if it was really about being a community volunteer, you would leave the stupid dress and the stupid makeup at home, and you would come down to the library dressed like a normal person and not a flamboyant fucking sex pervert. So let's call things what they bloody well are. You like to wear your drag queen gear around little kids because you get your jollies from it. And amazingly, in Democrat cities at least, you now have a socially acceptable excuse for doing it. It used to be you were just a garden variety child sex predator, probably with a windowless white van and a large bag of candy. But now you're a pillar of the community. Which brings us to another glowingly positive quote from the Speaker of the House. Quote, "It's my honor to be here, to say to all of you how proud we are of you. Thank you for the joy and beauty that you bring to the world. Your freedom of expression of yourselves in drag is what America is all about." Close quote. So Nancy Pelosi is very proud of you for putting on a dress and pantyhose and rubbing up against little kids at the library. She thinks that is beautiful and inspiring. And she probably sheds tears of joy when she sees cross-dressing little boys dancing in gay bars having sweaty child molesters jam dollar bills into their underwear. It was revolting enough when they just expected us to celebrate adult sex perversion, but now they want us to get up and cheer for actual honest-to-God child sex abuse. So let's state this in absolutely no uncertain terms. There is no such thing as a transgender child. Those are abuse victims. Their parents or guardians should be in prison. Any doctor who performs genital mutilations on minor children, or any permanent life-altering cosmetic surgery for that matter, should be similarly in prison, because these are quite simply some of the sickest, most evil, most morally depraved people among us, using this fashionable social contagion as an excuse to sexually abuse children or to enrich oneself by mangling their bodies. So I guess the final question for tonight is this. How long are you willing to go along with this evil just because you're afraid of being socially ostracized? As innocent children are being chewed up and spit out every day, their very childhood being stolen from them by opportunistic adult sex perverts and doctors with fewer professional ethics than Dr. Frankenstein. If we cannot summon the courage to stand up for our own children, to save them from the predations of people who would use them for evil, what the hell kind of people are we? And we'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks very much for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.